Welcome. The purpose of this seminar is to inform the public about changes to voting procedures brought about by Act R54 of 2011, also known as the Photo ID Bill. On January 1, 2013, state law changed the rules for voters showing ID at their polling place. State law now requires voters to present one of 5 types of photo identification cards when voting in person, with a couple of exceptions. One exception is that photo ID is not required to vote absentee by mail. That process has not changed. Photo ID is required to vote absentee in person. If you forget to bring your photo ID to the polls, there is a way to vote a provisional ballot and show your photo ID later. There is also an exception for voters who have an obstacle to obtaining one of the qualifying photo IDs, also known as a reasonable impediment. We'll cover that more in depth later in this presentation. Under the old rules, voters had to show one of 3 IDs to vote: a South Carolina driver's license, a South Carolina ID card issued by DMV, a South Carolina voter registration card. This is the old paper card without a photo. This card can no longer be used to vote on its own, but is required for a voter claiming a reasonable impediment, so the card is still useful. Again, we'll have more on voters who can't get a photo ID a little bit later in this presentation. Here is the new list of 5 qualifying photo IDs. You'll notice that 2 additional IDs have been added under the new law: a South Carolina driver's license, a South Carolina ID card issued by DMV. DMV now issues these cards for free to any person age 17 and older. A South Carolina voter registration card with a photo. This is a new photo ID that is available from your county voter registration office. We'll talk more about these IDs later in the presentation. Military ID issued by the federal government. This type of ID is new to the list. An Attorney General's opinion from February 2013 is that the VA benefits card does count as one of the military IDs issued by the federal government. A U.S. passport. This type of ID is also new to the list. A voter can vote with any of these IDs. The qualifying ID must be valid, meaning the ID is in effect, or in other words, not suspended. The ID must be current, meaning not expired. The purpose of the ID is to confirm that the person presenting himself to vote is the elector on the poll list. The address on the ID does not have to match the address where the voter is registered, as long as the ID is otherwise valid. This is not a change. One common example of this is when a voter changes his address with DMV, he is not issued a new driver's license or ID card. That card is still valid, even though it still shows his old address. When the voter shows that ID to the poll manager, the manager will ask the voter if the address on the voter registration list is correct. If the voter says the address on the voter registration list is correct, the voter will be allowed to vote as normal. Here are examples of each of the 5 qualifying photo IDs. South Carolina driver's license. The example on the right is the ID issued to drivers under 21 years of age. South Carolina ID card issued by DMV. These cards are now available free of charge from DMV for individuals aged 17 or older. Contact your local DMV or scdmvonline.com to learn what documentation is required to obtain a DMV ID card. This is the traditional booklet-style U.S. passport. Passports are also available in a card format, which are acceptable for voting. These passport cards are used for travel to Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Bermuda. Military ID issued by the federal government. This card is for a person serving in the Air Force. Similar cards are issued to members of the Army, Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. Remember, military IDs are not just for active or retired members of the military. The voter presenting this type of ID may be the spouse or dependent of a military member. Federal military IDs may also be issued by the Department of Defense to civilian employees, contractors, and visitors. If you are unsure whether an ID is a qualified federal military ID suitable for voting, answer these three questions. Is it federal? Is it military? Does it have a photograph? If the answer to all three of these questions is yes, and the ID is current and valid, it can be used for voting in South Carolina. A Department of Veterans Affairs benefits card is also considered a federal military ID under state law. It is important to know that the vast majority of South Carolinians won't notice a change with these new photo ID requirements. Most voters vote with their driver's license. Those voters do not need to do anything but continue bringing their driver's license to the polls. This also applies to voters who already have an ID card issued by the DMV, a federal military ID, or a U.S. passport. These voters just need to remember to bring one of those IDs with them to the polls. To summarize, a voter who already has one of these qualifying IDs does not need to get a photo voter registration card. Those voters are ready to vote. If you don't have one of these photo IDs, you need to get one. You can get a DMV ID card for free from your local DMV office, or you can get a voter registration card with a photograph for free from your county voter registration office. There are now three types of voter registration cards. Paper card without a photo, that's the current card, paper card with a photo, and a plastic card with a photo. We'll now look at the differences between those three cards. The paper card without a photograph is the voter registration card that's been used in South Carolina for many years. Voters may either have a blue or green card depending on when their card was issued. Voters will continue to be issued this card. If a voter registers to vote by mail or registers to vote online, the voter will receive this voter registration card without a photo as his certificate or registration. This is a confirmation of your voter registration, but it can't be used on its own to vote. This is important. A voter claiming a reasonable impediment exception will need to bring this card with him to his polling place. This is the paper voter registration card with a photograph. Voters who have their photo taken for a photo voter registration card will be issued this card first, meant to be used temporarily until their more durable plastic card arrives in the mail. To get a photo voter registration card, go to your county voter registration office. Either provide the office with your paper voter registration card without a photo, or verbally identify yourself by providing your name, date of birth, and last four digits of your Social Security number. The voter registration office will take your photograph and immediately issue you the paper voter registration card with a photo pictured here. The voter should immediately sign the card. This card can be used as a photo voter registration card for voting at the polls. Important: to use this card for voting at the polls, be sure not to detach the stub, which contains the photo, from the rest of the card, which contains your name and identifying information. This card does not have an expiration date and is valid as long as you remain a qualified voter in your county. While the card does not expire, it is meant to be used temporarily until you receive the more durable plastic voter registration card with a photo in the mail. This is the plastic voter registration card with a photograph. Voters will receive these through the mail. This card does not have an expiration date. Once you receive it, you should sign the back of the card immediately. Voters may request duplicate voter registration cards at any time from their county voter registration office. If you have a photograph on file, you may request any of the three types of voter registration cards. If you do not have a photograph on file, you can only request the paper voter registration card without a photograph unless you go into the office and have your photo taken. It is important to know that the requirements for registering to vote have not changed. To register to vote, the voter can provide either a current valid photo ID or a copy of a current utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, or other government document that shows his name and address in the county in which he is registering. These documents used to register are also known as the HAVA IDs. The current valid photo ID that can be used to register doesn't necessarily need to be one of the 5 qualifying photo IDs used for voting. For example, a voter could register with a college ID but could not vote with a college ID. Once you are registered, you may obtain a photo voter registration card. If you are registering in person, you may obtain a photo voter registration card at that time. We'll now look at the various methods of voter registration and what happens after you're registered. Voters who submit a mail-in voter registration application will receive a paper voter registration card without a photo by mail. This serves as the notification of registration and alone will not allow you to vote. Mail-in voter registration applications may also be submitted by fax or email. To vote in person, the voter will have to provide one of the 5 qualifying photo IDs. If the voter intends to vote in person and does not have one of the 5 qualifying photo IDs, he should get one. Voters may get a photo voter registration card by visiting their county voter registration office. Voters may also get a free photo ID from DMV. If a voter cannot get one of the 5 qualifying photo IDs, the voter must bring his paper voter registration card without a photo to the polling place to vote under the reasonable impediment exception at the polls. We'll have more to say on that a bit later. South Carolina now has online voter registration. Voters with a driver's license or DMV issued ID card can now register online at scvotes.org. By registering online, a voter's identity is confirmed using his DMV record. These voters do not have to provide any additional ID. Voters will be sent a paper voter registration card without a photo in the mail. Since these voters already have a qualifying photo ID, it is not necessary to obtain a photo voter registration card. However, that option is available to them by visiting their county voter registration office. A voter may also register in person at the county voter registration office. To register in person, the voter completes an application and provides a copy of one of the HAVA IDs. The voter will be notified that a photo ID is now required to vote at his polling place. The voter will then have the option at that time to get a voter registration card with a photo. The voter will have his photo taken and will immediately receive the paper voter registration card with a photo. The voter will later receive the more durable plastic voter registration card with a photo in the mail. If the voter does not choose to have his photo taken, he will get a paper voter registration card without a photo and will need to vote with one of the other qualifying photo IDs. We'll now take a look at voting in person at your polling place or the in-person absentee precinct. Most voters won't notice the difference when voting in person. That's because most voters vote with their driver's license or DMV ID. However, if you have previously voted with your paper voter registration card without a photo, you need to be sure to bring one of the qualifying photo IDs with you to the polls, if you have one. Again, those IDs are South Carolina driver's license, South Carolina DMV ID card, South Carolina voter registration card with a photo, federal military ID, a U.S. passport. If you do not have one of these qualifying photo IDs, you should get one before going to the polls to vote. While there are exceptions to having a qualifying photo ID, the best way to ensure your Election Day voting experience goes as smoothly as possible is to get one of the qualifying photo IDs and bring it with you to the polls to vote. Again, there are 2 free options for photo IDs, a DMV ID card or a voter registration card with a photograph. If you have a photo ID but forget to bring your photo ID to the polls on Election Day, you have 2 options. Retrieve your photo ID and return to vote. Vote a provisional ballot and present your photo ID to the County Election Commission no later than the time of the provisional ballot hearing. This ballot will not count unless you present your photo ID to the County Election Commission by the deadline. Provisional ballot hearings for general and special elections take place on the Friday following the election. Provisional ballots for primaries take place on the Thursday following the primary. Provisional ballot hearings for municipal elections may vary, but it is usually on Thursday following the election. The photo ID law provides an exception for voting at the polls for voters who have an obstacle to obtaining a photo ID, also known as a reasonable impediment to obtaining a photo ID. If you do not have a photo ID due to a reasonable impediment, You may vote a provisional ballot after showing your voter registration card without a photo and signing an affidavit attesting to your identity and impediment. The voter may list an impediment that the voter deems to be reasonable. According to the Attorney General, a reasonable impediment is any valid reason beyond the voter's control which created an obstacle to the voter obtaining the necessary photo identification in order to vote. The voter may claim any obstacle to obtaining a photo ID that he finds reasonable as long as it is true. Only the voter determines what is reasonable. In other words, only the voter can say whether any particular obstacle created a reasonable impediment to obtaining a photo ID. Poll managers, county election officials, and state election officials do not determine the reasonableness of the claimed impediment. The only determination the county election commission can make is whether the person lied about who they claim to be or that they lied about having an impediment. They can't decide whether the voter's claim is reasonable. There are several reasons pre-printed on the back of the provisional ballot envelope that the voter can simply check. Religious objection to being photographed, lack of transportation, disability or illness, lack of birth certificate, work schedule, family responsibilities. If one of the pre-printed reasons does not apply, the voter may check one of the other reasonable impediment boxes. If a voter is protected from disclosing his impediment, such as a medical condition, there is a box to check for other reasonable impediment, disclosure protected. If that box is selected, the voter is saying that they have a reason that they don't have to disclose under state or federal law. If disclosure of the impediment is not protected, the voter must check the appropriate box and list the impediment. Once the voter selects the impediment that applies to them, they must sign the affidavit. If a notary is available, the affidavit will be notarized. If a notary is not available, a poll manager will attest to the voter's signature. A provisional ballot cast under the reasonable impediment exception will count unless the county election commission has grounds to believe the affidavit is false. This means that the county election commission would have to have proof that either the voter is not who he says he is, or that he lied about having an impediment to obtaining photo ID. This is the front of the provisional ballot envelope. The poll manager completes the voter information section that is in red and at the top of the front side of the provisional ballot envelope for all voters casting a provisional ballot. In addition to completing the voter information section in red, number 1, if using a fail-safe provisional ballot, complete section A. Use fail-safe provisional ballot. If using as emergency provisional ballot, complete section B. Or section C or D on the reverse side pertaining to photo ID. This is the back of the provisional ballot envelope. If the voter did not bring photo ID, complete section C. If the voter has no photo ID, complete section D if the voter does not have an ID due to some obstacle. The voter will then sign the affidavit. A notary or poll manager will then attest to the voter's signature. Notaries may not charge the voter. Notaries may not require a photo ID to notarize the affidavit. Only the non-photo ID voter registration card. Notaries may not screen voters or evaluate voter capacity. To summarize, the reasonable impediment exception. A person who can't get a photo ID can go to the polls with their old voter registration card, just as they would have before, and vote. The only difference is that they will need to sign an affidavit affirming that they are who they say they are, and that they encountered an obstacle to obtaining one of the qualifying photo IDs. After voting a provisional ballot, the poll manager will provide the voter with a notice of the provisional ballot hearing. This tells voters when and where the provisional ballot hearing will be held. It notifies voters that they have the option of being present at the hearing. It notifies voters that if they voted under the reasonable impediment exception, that their vote will count as long as their affidavit is not found to be false. It also notifies voters without qualifying photo ID that did not claim a reasonable impediment that they must show their ID to the County Election Commission prior to certification of the election for their ballot to count. Various resources are available at the State Election Commission's website, scvotes.state.ll. SCVotes.org. These resources can be used by voters and any groups and individuals who wish to conduct their own voter education programs. You'll find a photo ID information page, a one-stop source for information on new photo ID requirements, posters and handouts that can be downloaded directly from the website. Printed posters and handouts are available from the County Elections Office. An updated poll manager's handbook. The updated handbook contains all procedures that poll managers will follow at the polling place on Election Day, including new procedures for photo ID, copies of the photo ID law, and the U.S. District Court opinion. The rules discussed in this PowerPoint come directly from State Law, Act R-54 of 2011, and from the U.S. District Court order that granted pre-clearance of that law. Copies of both of those documents can be accessed through SCVotes.org. A copy of this PowerPoint is available from your county voter registration and elections office. This PowerPoint can be used by public interest groups and individuals to conduct their own voter education. We strongly suggest that you contact a county election official to review this PowerPoint with you and answer any additional questions, if necessary, before conducting your own informational meeting. If you have any questions, please contact our office.